We are live.
Good afternoon, everyone. How you doing? Thank you for being here. We're really happy to have you in our presentation. Just for you to know, we will have a presentation about financing studies in the United States of America. We're going to start in a minute. We're giving more time for people to join, to coming in. We have 103 people at this point coming in. So just give us 1 minute. Be patient, please. This is going to be a very interesting topic, and we want to have a lot of people attending. Remember that if you have any questions, you simply have to write them in the Q&A. We're going to be answering them all through the presentation. Today, we are going to be joined by Margaret, Burke, Mo from Costa Rica, one of our EducationUSA advisors, and Claudia Soliz from Bolivia. Thank you for being with us today, Claudia and Margaret. And just one last minute thing, remember that we have 80 universities from the United States of America representing the whole system in the United States of America. You have great opportunities to ask questions about anything that you want to know about. So remember, as soon as the presentation is over, you can go visit different booths and make sure that you ask all the questions that you have. Let's just give 30 seconds and we are going to start with our presenters. Thank you for being here, Margaret and Claudia.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Samuel, and welcome everyone. We're so happy to be here with you today. My name is Claudia, and today we're gonna give our session on game plan to financing your studies in the United States, right? One of probably the most hot questions that we get out of office: how do I pay for my education in the United States? Well, today we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna go over vocabulary. We're gonna go over everything you need to know in order to finance your studies. So let's begin with the presentation, please. So the first thing that you have to take into consideration when studying in the United States is the budget for the application process, right? This is one of the first expenses that you will face when applying to the United States. This is something that everyone has to pay for, regardless of how much financial aid you are hoping to receive in the end or not, right? So what does this budget for the application process include? This can include application fees. That is the money that you pay universities in order to for them to review your application. Then we have documents. Sometimes perhaps your school will charge a small fee to issue your transcript, translations, courier services to send documents, credential evaluations. Then obviously we have the exams like the TOEFL, the SAT, the GRE, if we're talking about graduate students, test preparation, so there are many costs that are involved in this application process, which is why it's the first thing that you have to budget for. Now, this will vary from student to student. We say an approximate of between $750 and $1,500 will be spent in this stage. But again, this will vary a lot from student to student. There are some students that want to apply to 20 universities. There are other students that want to apply to 5 universities. We have students that maybe need to take the TOEFL more than once, or the SAT more than 2 times inclusive. So there's so many changes, each student is very different, but you need to know that you at the very least should be looking to spend that amount of money in order to apply to US universities. So that is the first amount of money that you will be spending when studying in the US. However, it's not the biggest one nor the most important. Let's talk about tuition expenses, living expenses, and whatnot. But before going into that, let's talk about type of institutions that you will be looking at when applying to universities in the US. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there are 2 types of institutions in the United States that you have to take into consideration. The first are public institutions that are universities and colleges that receive funds from the government. This can include community colleges and 4-year institutions. The one thing that we have to take into account about these institutions is that they offer different tuition pricing for residents versus non-residents, right? This is what's called in-state tuition versus out-of-state tuition. In-state tuition is the price that is awarded to US citizens who live in the state, and out-of-state tuition is the price that is awarded to anyone that is not from the state, right? For international students, we're mainly looking at out-of-state tuition. So that's something that's important to take into consideration when doing your research, because you will see different prices, and that sometimes can be confusing. So you have to look most cases at out-of-state tuition. Then we have private institutions that are universities and colleges that do not receive direct funding from the government. But unlike public institutions, they do offer the same pricing for everyone, regardless of whether you are a resident or not of the state, or whether you're a US citizen or not. So just to make this more clear, I'm going to give you an example. Next slide, please. So let's pretend you are a student from Ohio. You've been paying taxes in Ohio. So for that, you are considered a resident from Ohio, right? So you will be, when applying to college, you're looking at in-state tuition, which will be around $11,000. Since you've paid taxes, that's why it's cheaper. However, let's say you live in California and you want to study in a university in Ohio, then even if you are a US citizen, you would still be looking at out-of-state tuition, which would be around $33,000. So as you can see, the price difference is a lot. So that's something, again, why you want to be careful when doing your research. Now, this applies only for tuition. That is the money that you're paying for your classes. The same does not apply for room and board. Room and board normally doesn't vary for whether you are a resident or not. In this example, room and board is set at $13,000, and that wouldn't change whether you are from California, from Ohio, or from Bolivia or Costa Rica, right? So that's something that you want to take into consideration. Now, there are some public universities that offer incentives for international students to come to their institutions. So for example, in Bolivia, University of Arkansas offers Bolivian residents and citizens in-state tuition, right? So that's an agreement that they have with Bolivian citizens, which is really nice. And there are many universities across the US that offer this type of incentives. So you definitely want to reach out to your EducationUSA advisor in order to see if this is a possibility, because that definitely makes affording your education more affordable. Next slide, please. Now let's go over some financial aid terminology that we'll be using throughout this presentation. The first one will be scholarships. This is money that is awarded to students, and it's money that doesn't need to be paid back in the future. So this is obviously one of the most sought after types of financial aid, and definitely the one that we all want to get, because there's no future responsibilities or anything. Then we have work study. Work study is a condition offered by the university where the student can be hired for a job on campus. So you get preference in the job hiring process, and you're able to earn some money from this. Now, while this is money that enters your pockets, it's not too much. So it's like $2,000 a year. So that's something that you want to take into consideration, that maybe it might help for some expenses, but not the big expenses. Then we have loans. Loans is money that is given to the student that must be paid back at a later time with interest. So you want to be careful with loans, because it's money that not only you have to pay back, but you also have to pay interest for the time that you took that money out for, right? Loans are usually not available for international students in the United States unless you have an American citizen that can be a cosigner. Loans might be available in your country, but that's something that you have to research on your own, whether banks in your country offer this possibility or not. Then we have grants. Grants is money awarded to a student by a governmental institution, and that doesn't need to be paid back. So that will vary from country to country. There are some countries where they do offer incentives for students to be educated abroad, so you might be able to get a grant through that. So definitely research those well before studying in the US. Then we have the term financial aid. Financial aid would be the umbrella term for all of these types of economic support that I just mentioned to you. That includes scholarships, work study, loans, and grants. Then we have sponsor. This is another term very important. This is the person or organization that has made a commitment to pay for part or all of your studies, right? So a sponsor can be an institution like the government through a grant, the university through a scholarship, or it can also be a person like your parents. If your parents are the ones that are helping you pay for education, then they will be your sponsors in a way, right? So that would be what is a sponsor. Then going on to two terms that are very important for graduate students. First, we have assistantship. This is an award given to a graduate student to work up to 20 hours per week as a research assistant, teaching assistant, or graduate assistant. And in return for this work, they get financial aid, which can include a tuition waiver, a monthly stipend, and whatnot. Again, this only applies for the graduate level. Alongside the assistantships, we have fellowships that are merit awards typically given at the graduate level to a scholar to finance their studies and advance their studies in an academic area, right? So this is, you normally don't have to work in fellowships, although each fellowship will vary, But those are the two types that you need to consider if you're applying for graduate programs. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now let's go into undergraduate financial aid. Now, within undergraduate, there are two types of financial aid that you need to consider. The first one is, next slide, please. Thank you. The first type that you have to consider is merit-based aid. This is aid that is given on your merit. Now, what does having merit mean? It can mean many things. It can mean having a strong academic profile in high school. That means, maybe having straight A's, being top student of the school, of your country. There are different ways in which you can excel in that. Then having strong SAT or SAT scores, evidence of volunteering, extracurricular activities, sports scholarships. Maybe you excel at a certain sport, then you can access that. That's a merit. Artistic scholarships too, maybe you have ability for art. However, artistic scholarships are normally given to students that are going to study in that field of art, right? So that's something to take into consideration. The other type of aid is need-based aid, which is financial aid that is offered to a student based on their economic situation and that of their family, right? So that is how much can your family afford for your education. The university will take into account this, what is the cost of the university, how much can my family afford, and the difference between those two will be your need. So that is need-based aid, which is the other type. It's important to note that very few universities offer need-based aid to international students, and most of the times when they do, they're universities that are extremely competitive. So that's something very important to take into account. Next slide, please. Now, which one, right? For which one is better, how should I go about it? For international student applicants, it's very important to know that some US universities will offer only merit-based in most cases for international students. Some offer only need-based aid, and some offer both, a combination of both. And some universities do not offer any aid, financial aid to international students, right? So that is something that you definitely want to take into consideration, because if a university that you really want to go to does not offer any financial aid to international students, then maybe that's a university you may want to reconsider and take off your list, because if you're not able to afford it, then you will most likely not be able to attend, right? So this is something that you want to take into consideration. If the university only offers merit-based aid, for example, then you may want to look, do I have the merits that the university is looking after, right? So these are things that you definitely want to take into consideration when you're researching. Next slide, please. Now let's look at an example of the different institutions that you may run across at the undergraduate level. So here we have three types of universities. We have Harvard University, a private university, University of Arizona, which is public, and San Mateo Community College. Now, besides the type of institutions that they are, where they receive their funding, one of the big differences, as you can tell, is the tuition and fees, right? There's a big difference between Harvard, that is at $54,000, University of Arizona at $36,000, and San Mateo at $8,000, right? So for example, Harvard, by being private and being extremely competitive, can also be very generous with its financial aid. It does offer need-based aid for international students. However, it is extremely competitive to get into Harvard. So that is something you want to take into consideration, right? Then we have University of Arizona. That is a public university. It's definitely cheaper than Harvard. However, public universities cannot give need-based aid to international students, and full scholarships are very unlikely, if not, they're very rare among public universities for international students at the very least. And then we have San Mateo Community College that, as it is, community colleges are cheaper. So because of that, they don't really offer scholarships or financial aid, really. They may offer small incentives in the form of like low scholarship amounts, like $5,500 to $1,500, but these are just small incentives. They're not really big scholarships. However, as it is, they're already cheaper. So you can see the difference in these types of institutions, and that can help you maybe decide, if I have the profile for a private university, then maybe that might be better because they offer better financial aid. If not, then maybe I'll go for public and look for options like in-state tuition available for people from my country, or maybe if not, community college, that is a definitely cheaper option among the three, right? Next slide, please. Now, questions to ask in your research. Very important. Does this university offer scholarships for international students? You have to keep it real, right? You have to answer that question honestly. And if it does, what type of scholarship do they offer? Do they offer need-based, merit-based? how much, what is the maximum amount? You want to keep these questions in your mind when doing your research for sure. And that's where, next slide, please. That's where our number one advice will be at, is be realistic, right? Can you realistically afford this institution, not just for the first year, but throughout your 4 years and during your undergrad career? So in this example, let's say a university, total estimated cost with tuition, books, health insurance, room and board is $60,000. If the maximum amount that that university gives in financial aid is $45,000, then that means the family or the student will need to contribute at least $15,000. You have to ask the question, can I afford $15,000 per year for 4 years? If the answer is yes, then that's a university that you should apply for. If the answer is no, then you may have to look for another university where you can actually afford it. So be realistic, keep it real, is very important. Sometimes it can be hard because we would like to have everything, but unfortunately, when it comes to education, we have to stay real and take these things into consideration. Next slide, please. Now, how do I apply for financial aid? When researching your universities, make sure to note how they award financial aid. Each university is different. We will say, however, that most institutions will automatically consider you for merit-based aid. That is, by applying, you're automatically considered for merit-based aid because they want to attract the best students, right? However, if you're looking at universities that offer need-based aid, then they will probably ask you to fill out the CSS profile. That is a form where they ask, all about your financial situation. How much do your parents earn? Do you have siblings? I don't know, do you own your house? Yes, you pay rent. All of these questions in order to get an idea of the financial situation of the family and how much the family can contribute towards your education. So sometimes filling out CSS profile can be overwhelming, but that's what EducationUSA advisors are here for. So if you have any questions or problems, please reach out to your advisor. Lastly, there's a lot of buzz around full tuition or full scholarship programs. They exist, however, not all universities offer them, and they're not always available for international students. However, when they are, they normally have a separate application, or sometimes they have a different deadline. So you definitely want to do your research. You don't want to miss the deadlines. You don't want to miss the extra application because you don't want to miss on the money. So do your research properly and look out for all of these items. So yeah, that would be it for undergraduate students. Let's go with graduate financial aid with Mo.
Thanks, Claudia. Yes, so we just talked about the different types of financial aid available at the undergraduate level, and now we're going to talk about the graduate financial aid that we have. So moving forward, at the graduate level, they do not call them scholarships. The different types of financial aid can be through assistantships or fellowships. Assistantships are types of jobs that are given by the university to graduate students. A graduate student is someone who is studying a master's or PhD. And the assistantship works where the person will be working for the university either as a teacher, a researcher, or as an administrative assistant. And for their work, they will receive their tuition paid for and sometimes a monthly stipend to cover their rent and their food. So a teaching assistantship, for example, let's say you are a master's student in biology. You may be teaching a Biology 1 course to bachelor students, and for your work as a teaching assistant, they will pay for your tuition and give you the stipend to pay for your food and rent. With the research assistantship, instead of teaching classes, you're going to support a professor with the research project in the lab, working up to 20 hours a week. And as for the graduate assistantship, you normally work as like an administrative assistant in a department, supporting some type of office on campus. If you are trying to get a research assistantship, it is super important that you do your research about the professors in that department at the university, because they're the ones that kind of control who can get the teaching and research assistantships. So you need to send emails to the professors you're interested in working with. You want to read about their research that they're doing. You can use the scholargoogle.com, write them emails about your interest to work with them next year and see if they have any spots in their lab, because they should know you or have heard of your name before you apply. However, it is important to keep in mind that some programs do not offer financial aid until the second year. Okay, moving to the next slide. What does an assistantship cover? An assistantship can be partial or full, okay? So it's important not to assume that an assistantship is a full scholarship. There are partial assistantships, and a partial assistantship may be where you work a few hours a week, and so they pay for a few credits, for example, one class instead of all 3 classes. Or perhaps they will pay a partial stipend, which means they will not pay you every single month, but they will pay you one amount of money for the entire semester, like $2,000 for the semester. In this case, the partial assistantship is not enough money to cover all of your tuition and housing costs. So the student would need to complement the assistantship with their own funds, or maybe some type of scholarship from their government in their home country, right? A full assistantship normally includes a full tuition waiver, right, where they do not have to pay for any classes, and a monthly stipend that is enough for them to pay for rent, food, and personal items. However, oftentimes the students are still required to pay for the fees, which are like administrative charges from each class, and sometimes health insurance, okay? So normally the full assistantship is very close to a full scholarship. It's like a 98% scholarship, but sometimes it's not complete 100%, and you may be responsible to pay a little bit of money each year. An example, at a public institution in West Virginia, the cost for 1 year in the master's in teaching English to speakers of other languages is about $45,000, and the teaching assistantship covers $42,000. So they want the student to show that they have $3,000 in savings. This does not mean that they have to pay the money to the university. They just have to have it as a backup, just in case they need the money, right? And in some situations, if the person who's applying is super competitive, and if the department has a very big budget, you can get a very generous full assistantship, or what I like to say, a super full assistantship, where they pay for full tuition. They give you a generous monthly stipend. So maybe instead of having to live with a roommate, you can live by yourself, right? Because you have more money. And sometimes they even cover most of your health insurance or all of your health insurance. But this is going to depend a lot on the program and the budget they have. Moving forward, there are different patterns and trends at the graduate level. For example, there is more funding or more money available for doctoral PhD programs than master's programs. And there's more money available at research and doctoral universities instead of master's institutions, right? And unfortunately, there's not a lot of funding for professional programs like law, medicine, dentistry, and MBAs, whereas there is funding available in academic programs. To continue, the funding also can vary between the different fields that you study, right? There's a lot of money available in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, where at the PhD level, almost all PhD candidates receive funding, and more than half of candidates at the master's level receive funding. In the humanities, it is a little bit more difficult, but it is not impossible, right? You could, for example, try and apply to a PhD in linguistics and potentially find funding. But as I mentioned, unfortunately, for the areas of business, law, medicine, dentistry, there are no assistantships available. There's no funding. So it's very common that you have to take a loan to pay for your education. To continue. So how to get started. And this is about making a game plan at both the undergraduate and graduate level, right? So the first thing that you need to do is you need to have that conversation with your family, or if you are an adult and you are going to apply to a master's or PhD, you need to evaluate your savings and your economic abilities, right? It may be a bit uncomfortable, but you need to ask your parents how much your family can pay for your education each year, if they can pay for anything, right? So that you have an idea, because if they tell you, look, we can only pay $3,000 a year, you need to look for schools that are very generous with their financial aid. If they say that they can pay $20,000 a year, you have a little bit more options, right? Speaking of which, with that number in mind about how much you can pay for, you now need to research your options and choose realistic options. You need to look and see what is the maximum amount that that university could offer you in funding versus the budget you have to pay for your education each year. It's also super important to apply as early as possible, okay? You need to make sure you have all of the deadlines written down for admission, for financial aid, if they offer financial aid, need-based financial aid, and any additional scholarship programs. Sometimes when you apply early in the application cycle, you sometimes receive an answer early as well, right? And while you are waiting for your answer to see if you got in or you got funding, you can also look for additional funding in your community, in your country. You can do fundraising, you can sell empanadas, you can get a part-time job, anything you can to start to save money for your next adventure. And we also have some resources for your search, okay? Of course, on Education USA, we have a wonderful website with lots of resources. And there are a lot of different search engines you can use, like College Board, Peterson's, grad schools, lots and lots and lots of options to look for different schools. However, we do want to highlight that the most up-to-date information will be on the university's website, right? Things change. Their scholarship budgets may change, the types of scholarships they give can change. And so you want to check the website of each university and college to get the most up-to-date information. And if you cannot find some information about the scholarships, or you're not sure if it's a partial assistantship or a full assistantship, please send them an email. Send them emails and look for that information. Be persistent. And finally, on the next slide, we also recommend that you keep an Excel to remain organized with your search. And you want to write down a lot of details about each institution. For example, you want to think about where it's located. If you don't like the cold, you should not apply to schools in Alaska, right? You want to write down the different programs you're interested in studying. And as we talked about with Claudia, you need to write down how much it costs for 1 year versus how much they can offer you in scholarships to figure out how much your family and yourself would need to pay. As well as all the deadlines and the different testing things, you really need to write down why you like this university. That is super important, because remember that these universities receive thousands and thousands of applications. And if you simply say that you like the name or you heard it was a good university, that does not demonstrate that you've done your research. You need to tell them about the specific programs, student organizations, research opportunities that make you want to become part of that university. Moving forward. Other types of financial aid, we definitely recommend reaching out to the Education USA advisor in your country, because the financial aid situation is different in every country. Some countries do have government scholarships or government funding, so please reach out to your advisor in your country. You can also start to look for a sponsor or do fundraising, like I mentioned, make empanadas or make cake and brownies and sell them in your neighborhood to start making money. And you can also consider taking out a loan. There is a loan called the Roe Fund that is through the OAS, Organization of American States, that offers a $15,000 interest-free loan for many students in the Caribbean and Latin America. So you would not have to pay more money back. You would simply have to pay the $15,000 that you ask for, right? And as I mentioned, check out our Education USA website to find the different scholarship opportunities that the universities are publishing about. And if we did not have the chance to answer all of your questions today, again, reach out to the Education USA Center in your country. We're located in more than 175 countries around the world, and we will be happy to help you and answer all of your questions. So thanks for being with us today as we talked about making the game plan to financing your studies in the United States. And we hope to see you in the next few presentations at this fair.
Thank you, everyone.